Let's say 30. But a lot of it has been able to cut out because of the checkup. So it might be, I might be 20 minutes at the end.
So that's what you want to lecture. Coronial Court now stands resumed. Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honour. Assistant Commissioner, my name is Andrew Bowe and I'm one of the barristers appearing for the Walker, Lane and Robertson families. And you would know that that covers, for example, Acpo Williams, and I understand that there was a senior member from Kintor that was here from the Lane family. He may come back in. So I've got some questions covering 4 issues on behalf of the families, and after that, if I have time and that which has been allocated to me, I just want to cover some of the things that you spoke to Dr. Dwyer about. Okay. I don't propose to spend much time at all on the events after the shooting, which has been covered a fair bit already. Do you understand? And when I'm asking the questions, I'm assuming that you have some prior knowledge about some matters. If you need more information for context, please ask me.
I will.
We heard, if I may say, and appreciated that you are a senior police officer who's had an extensive exposure to Warlpiri culture, and two of the things that you said, which I wanted to ask briefly about, is that despite all your attempts and your genuine engagement, you still felt that you had much more to learn, and you described it as a deep and complex culture with unique attributes to it. The second thing you conceded near the end was that in terms of making some of the operational decisions on the night, that you had carried with you some assumptions about Warlpiri culture of which you have now been disabused. I'll use the example of that, the assumption that the community and specific people might not behave in a controlled way had they been given information on the night. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I am, but that's not what I said. That's not the assumption that I made.
I thought you made an assumption that you weren't sure how Warren Williams would behave, and you referenced an earlier occasion of him having behaved in a way that was not controlled. That's one of the things I was talking about.
Correct.
And secondly, you made an assumption, despite your knowledge of Derek Williams, that it would be risky to give him information, for example, because you weren't sure how he would respond.
So assumption is your word, decision is my word.
Right. Now, just dealing with the issue of the accumulated knowledge, and what I want to mostly speak about is foresight rather than hindsight. That is, foresight going forward. We have the benefit of hindsight in examining your behaviour. What I'd like to direct your mind to is what we go forward with that sort of information. Firstly, insofar as the recognition or your knowledge about the respect to be given to sorry business, okay? Now, you had quite a lot of understanding of that even before the events of this shooting. Is that correct?
Yes.
We've heard evidence so far that talks about various people, including Senior Constable Hand, Sergeant Jolly, and others, including Sergeant Frost, about that notion of taking into account the existence of sorry business in terms of operational decisions, especially when the tasks were not urgent. For example, if it's not urgent to arrest a person there and then there's thought should be given to deferring that action until after the funeral. You're nodding?
Yeah, I understand your premise.
Yeah. So in this case, the application of that knowledge wasn't necessarily fulfilled. You accept that?
In relation to,
For example, the arrest attempt on the 6th of November.
you've lost me.
Well, they went and arrested him when we all know that his grandfather was being buried that week and that he had special obligations in respect of that funeral.
Your Honour, I object to the question because at the time that
I'm going to get to that they didn't know.
was arrived at, that knowledge should
Yeah,
exist.
I'm going to get to that. The proposition is two-layered. First is, one, you've got to know of something to take it into account, okay?
Yes?
Hand and Smith both say that they did not know of the funeral, okay? If we acknowledge, however, knowledge of that sort of situation is a necessary part of making decisions, the first feature is, why did they not know? Do you understand? And we've spoken to Sergeant Frost and Jolly about a system perhaps being in place that the OIC at least is aware of the existence of sorry business so that all in their command can perhaps take that into account on non-urgent business. Would you agree that that's a good thing to put into place? That
Look, in theory, yes,
why just in theory?
because the information needs to be actually shared, and that's the challenge.
That's the point.
And it's a two-way challenge. It's not just a one-directional challenge.
One of the things is you need to have a system where people in the community feel comfortable in coming and telling you and engaging in that sort of consultation. And secondly, what you do about that so all your members are aware. Now, do you have in your mind any suggestions how we might achieve the situation that the sort of knowledge that you accumulated in your engagements, of which you spoke about the instrumental role of elders and ACPOs, etc., how might we achieve going forward that bulk of knowledge you've acquired is passed on to each officer in charge of a station with these sorts of issues?
Look, it's a really good question. It's one that we've been considering in the last 24 hours, and I know that there's some work being done around police induction documents that are a written document that a member who's new to a community can pick up, read, and it will give them some insight into the community context that they're walking into. That's one component of it. There needs to be community leadership as well. So people within the community, any community, not just the Walpurgis community, in the Moo community, that are the points of contact for new police that will sit down and talk them through the cultural nuances of that location. I've indicated very early in my evidence that you can have broad-ranging cross-cultural awareness, but each community is unique and distinctly different from a language and a cultural perspective. So each community needs to create that availability to the police to be able to allow that to be a two-way process, to allow people to learn at their pace, because different people are going to accept that knowledge in different ways.
Yes. And that's why early on in these hearings I used the word corporate knowledge, and what I meant was to make good of the accumulation of knowledge that people like you have from 20 years ago, so that we're not starting at Groundhog Day each time a new officer in charge comes to a station. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. And that is not just a general induction about cultural matters, but general information about operational decisions affected by that accumulated knowledge.
So I'm not sure that a document like that will provide you information about operational decisions, only so far as giving you some insight into the cultural nuances that you must consider in that operational context.
Yeah, I'll just use two examples, if I may. There seems to be agreement across the board that it would be ideal to not interrupt sorry business with police duties unless they're urgent.
I'd suggest that is actually what happens territory-wide in any case.
Well, that's what I want to interrogate. Do you think nothing more needs to be done for that to be a factor that must be taken into account in determining the timing of operational duties? Do you think nothing more needs to be done?
I didn't suggest that. We can always continue to review and refresh the information that we make available to our police. I know that at times we've not conducted ourselves in a manner appropriate to the circumstances, not at Yuendamu and other parts of the territory. The territory, again, is very complex and diverse. What happens in the top end and the saltwater is different to the freshwater, which happens differently here. So each particular station needs its own induction document and information package, and that needs to be continually refreshed and reviewed to make sure it's contemporary with the changing environment for that particular community. For example, any document that's relevant to Yuendamu needs to now have some context around the events of November 2019 and what that means for police in that community going forward, if you're new to that community.
The reason I raised that question about whether more needs to be done is that there's evidence in this court from Sergeant Hand that he said that even if he knew that there was a funeral on, he would still have proceeded to arrest. So that's why I raise it with you. When you say we do this across the territory, there's evidence here that Hand, who is a close colleague of yours, who you believe to have an enormous experience in working in this area, himself was not going to do that. Do you understand why I raised the question?
I do, but that doesn't mean that because there's a funeral, it doesn't change the community safety obligations of police. It's
No
consideration.
doubt, no doubt. But if we're always going to fall back to that, we'll get nowhere with respect. He was saying and accepting that it was not urgent. You understand? And at that point in time, the only issue that Kumanjayi was being arrested for was breaching a condition of a suspended sentence. So we can point to needs to arrest people, but that circumstance, if I may suggest to you, really needed acknowledgement of the importance of sorry business, and it was not undertaken.
And as I now understand, the police didn't know about it anyway.
Well, the point being, Assistant Commissioner, is that he said it would not have made any difference.
Now, that's a decision that he made at the time. I wasn't there present, but I understand your premise.
And the premise being we need to do more about this, and I'm inviting you to accept that.
Understood.
Okay. So I deal with the second issue, which is your involvement in the deployment of the additional members to Yuendamu on the 9th of November. Just cutting to the chase, my understanding of all your answers that you've given in various forums is that the only deployment you approved of was for additional officers to perform general duties, and secondly, for the deployment of a specialist dog handler and trained dog. Is that fair?
That's fair.
You conceded at one point that you felt that your conversations with Nobbs involved a consideration of abundance of caution as to why your authority was being obtained. I'm trying to paraphrase in a way to remind you, but there was something in your communications that you spoke about today that you recognised that your authority was only required if, in fact, an IR team was being deployed. Do you understand?
Yes.
In terms of the command structure.
Yes.
Insofar as sending general duties, Nobbs could have done it himself, correct?
Correct.
So the fact that you had sat in the position of Curry, who would ordinarily be that person about deployment of IRT, the fact that you had got into that position to have that authority, is it concerning that you were assuming a decision-making power without knowing the SOP in relation to the decision that needed your mandate?
In that regard, I rely upon the knowledge of someone like Superintendent Nobbs to guide me through any concerns that he may have in relation to that decision making. I did know that the incident response team approval in a general support sense required commander's approval or territory duty super. So I did know that anyway.
Yes.
But at the intimate detail within that policy, outside of that, no, I didn't.
That's a disconnect, isn't it? The person with the authority to deploy people with long arms, with serious weaponry, was vested in you. You were being contacted to get that formal approval, and yet you did not know of the SOP that applied. You had not read it.
No, I hadn't read it, but I knew it existed.
It doesn't help if you don't know what's in it, does it? To make the decision that it was being asked of you.
So the decision that I was being asked to make was the deployment of general duties police who are members of a particular team to that community.
I understand. One of the words you used in your statements is that you used the word instant response team at one point. Do you recall?
Did I?
You did, I suggest.
Giving evidence or today? Or?
In one of your interviews. I can take you to it if you like.
So that may not have been my words, that could be a transcription issue.
Well, it may be, but it was coupled with this idea that the knowledge you had about them was they could be deployed quickly.
I don't know it as the instant response team, they're the incident response team.
Incident instead of instant.
Yes. See, what's recorded as to what you've said, and I haven't heard the recording, although others here have, that the staff that he intended to deploy from Alice Springs were staff based in what's known as the Instant Response Team or the IRT. The reason for this request was that that group most likely allow for a timely and efficient response because they're likely to answer the phone. To seek other staff may take longer. So what I was suggesting to you is, I'm not picking up on that word slip. It may be you never used the word. But what was in your mind was that the advantage that those who were included in the IRT pool was they were trained to be able to be readily employed to move away from their general duties to attend an incident. Is that fair?
As I understand, yes.
And so it's the accessibility of them that you were mindful of, that we could get them quickly, and knowing that there was a time scale reference to the nurses leaving.
That was the advice that Superintendent Nobbs provided me, yes.
Thank you. Is it becoming apparent in the disconnect between your recollection and that which you know of Nobbs, that the issue of communication between you and him was at times riddled with misunderstandings of what each was expecting of the other?
No.
Well, he was expecting, it seems on his evidence, an IR team deployment. You were thinking you were only being asked to deploy general duties. Is that not a disconnect?
I haven't heard his evidence, so I'm not sure what his evidence is.
You know what he says. You've read his material, haven't you?
No.
You've heard Proctor's criticisms of this disconnect?
I'm aware of what's in the Proctor report.
Yeah, you're not interested in knowing whether or not you were ad idem in your conversation and whether or not that process of communication should be improved?
So the conversation that I had with Superintendent Nobbs in my mind was quite clear. What happened after that, I now know, appears to have been different. And unfortunately, I had no control over what happened after the approval was provided.
Let me be clear. I'm not trying to impart blame to either of you. I'm wanting to recognise in your position of command that if there was that sort of disconnect, that's something that needs to be addressed into the future.
That I don't disagree.
Yeah, one of those things is what's in fact in the SOP is that the operational requirements are put in writing by the officer in charge seeking that information, so that the decision being made by those who deploy know exactly what is being sought, and you can make your own judgment of whether what's being sought should in fact be deployed. That's fairly obvious, isn't it?
It sounds obvious, yes.
It didn't happen, correct?
Well, I now understand there was things put into writing.
You never saw them.
Not at the time, no.
You never even saw the arrest plan.
No, I didn't.
So what do we need to put into place that a person in your position of authority of deployment doesn't miss these sorts of important communications in making these decisions into the future? What do you think should be put?
What was that? Oh, sorry, I thought that was a comment.
What do you think needs to be done to remove the possibility of this sort of informational disconnect for deployment of personnel such as IRTs and TRGs into the future?
I'm not going to talk about TRG because that's a well-defined process. We're talking about the IRT. The IRT doesn't exist anymore. It's been disbanded, as I understand. The way in which that scenario occurred on that day and what happened after that, the only thing that may have changed that is the conversation to be distilled into writing, but other than that, I have little further to add.
See, all these situations that might necessitate a team like an IRT or TRG will always necessarily be in frantic, urgent circumstances, won't they? They'll be very...
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay, well, some will be. Some will
Potentially, yes.
Like on this night, everything's happening whilst a lot of protections in place in your system were being challenged. That's fair, isn't it? With people on at dinners, people away from their command post. Do you not think that there needs to be some examination internally to put into place things that will actually work?
And I already indicated to the court that there is a process that's been developed in relation to creating an enhanced risk assessment process for police, and I'm aware that some additional evidence will be provided to the court in due course in relation to that. It's not something that I've been involved in, so I'm not really in a capacity to speak to it in detail, but I understand the court will provide that information in due course.
Because of time, I've got two more issues I want to quickly cover. You've heard, even before this inquest, that the Walpri community in Yuendamu have got a very strong position about them being very frightened of guns in the community held by police. You've heard that, haven't you?
Since this event, yes.
Have you heard any of the evidence in this inquest about that?
No, I haven't.
Now, I'll just tell you very briefly that there's been evidence that's been accepted as sincere by many of your colleagues, if not all, that the people in the community do not wish community police to carry Glocks. Okay, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that they've expressed that they are very frightened when police carry Glocks in the community. Would you accept from me that that's evidence before?
I take your word for that.
All right. If that has been expressed in this court, would you accept that it's sincere?
It's sincere I understand.
That they are scared of guns being used by police in the community?
The Walpri at Yuendamu?
Yes.
If that's what they suggest?
One of them was Ned Hardgraves, who gave us a speech in the beginning, and he spoke specifically about that. And you know Ned?
I do know Ned.
And when you know he expresses that, you know that it's a sincere feeling that he has.
Understood.
For his community. When you're talking about being aware of community sentiment on an issue like that, is it reasonable to connive of a way to address those concerns from a police perspective?
Connive?
Well, to think of, conceive, to process what we might do, given that we're policing in a unique community. They have a unique history, what we've spoken about. Dr. Dwyer took you to the Coniston scenario, where it's interaction between police and community. And even now, you've recognised that we need to take into account these events of the 9th of 2019. Would you be open in your area, given your seniority, to having a further discussion about the mandates of Section 9 of the use of force operational orders that are in place?
And what is that?
Which is generally that all police officers must wear all weapons attached to their accoutrement belt, meaning community police must all wear Glocks when they're policing in the community.
I don't support any change to that particular policy.
Are you open to conversation about that, given what we've heard about what the Walpri community...
Happy to have conversations, but I would suggest change my view in relation to the importance of police being able to fulfil their duty with all of the use of force continuum items and tools available to us.
Would you take into account the evidence, including from you, that in all your years of policing you've never had to draw your gun?
I'm lucky and unique in that circumstance. Others are not.
Every police officer that's come in here to give evidence with 20 years experience have all said they've never had to draw their gun.
And that's fantastic. I'm very pleased that their environment has been such that that's the case, but it's not the case for every Northern Territory police officer, unfortunately.
I'm not asking for consideration for the entire Northern Territory. I'm asking for consideration to make decisions affecting a particular community or a number of communities with this evidentiary basis. Do you understand what I'm putting to you?
Yes.
And you've accepted that you're saying that you've got a firm view, you'll talk about it, but you're not going to change. Is that what you're saying?
No, because the risk at that Yuendamu community, that's what you're talking about, can change at a moment's notice, and that places the police officers who are there with the expressed intent to maintain community safety. If they cannot do that, then their job becomes redundant. And part of the requirement is for them to be able to access lethal force in the event that it's required.
I understand. One of the, if I may say, wonderful things that you did do following the 9th of November was A, be invited to, and B, actually attend some of the sorry business. And you know that was of great, that was received very warmly by those who you know in the community. Do you understand?
Yes,
You were there as a police officer.
I was.
Did you wear your Glock in that time?
No, I did not.
On what basis did you not comply with the operational order that you must wear a Glock when you're on duty?
Because I didn't have time to get to the police station, to the armory, to get my firearm, to get it packed, to get to the airport, to get to Alice Springs, to Yuendamu in time.
All right, but you're allowed to not comply with that ruling.
I was well aware that I was non-compliant, and everyone that I drove around with in that community, I talked to them about the fact that I didn't have a firearm on, and what we would do if there was a situation that required us to use any level of engagement and or force.
And this was the situation which you've used as an example when there's heightened emotions in the community, at which time anything could happen.
If I had have had the opportunity, I would have much preferred to have my accoutrements with me.
All right. Were you aware of the fact that there were TRG in the community at the time you were?
Yes, I was aware.
And did you have any role in deciding what weaponry they would use in the community?
No, I did not, other than the evidence I've already provided in relation to the passive community safety and engagement aspect.
We've heard that, and it's unreliable if I may say, that the TRG did bring guns into the community, but they were left in the station at the time that they were patrolling. Right? That's sort of not clear in the evidence. There's competing evidence from other people. May I show you this picture? I've given a copy to Beck. Can this be displayed at all? It's the this one here, Beck. It's a screenshot. I have 5 minutes left. Okay. Plus injury time. Can you see that picture on your screen?
Yes.
Can you recognise who that officer is?
No, I don't know who that is.
Do you accept that that's a long arm of some sort?
It appears to be.
Does that look like an AR-15 to you?
No, it doesn't.
What sort of gun is that?
It looks like a shotgun.
A shotgun, okay. A shotgun that can shoot lethal rounds?
I don't know.
Well, is it a beanbag shotgun or is it?
I don't know.
Okay. The website on which we got that picture suggested that that was in the wake of the shooting. Are you in any position to verify whether the TRG were carrying long arms in the community whilst you were there?
I have no idea where that photo's come from. That's not a police officer. That there's a badge on the arm there that would suggest that might be that indicates it's either an Aboriginal community police officer or an auxiliary, which again means that I don't know whether that's a real photo or not.
I'll have to accept that. We just thought
It doesn't appear to be a real. Looks though it may be doctored.
it may be incident of false reporting. I don't know. Okay.
I would suggest so because that doesn't.
Can I just move to my last topic? I just wanted to take you to 3 text exchanges, which is before the court, but none of which of the kind that you've been taken to by Dr. Dwyer. These are not about race. Okay. The first one is it's in brief number 3-161 at page 6399. Beck, do you have that first one? I don't want you to put it up, right? I'm just letting the other parties know it. I've been told not to read it out so as to identify people. So I'll take you through what's in the text and ask you for a comment. Okay? Page 6399. Brief number 3-161. I can actually give you my copy, Dr. Dwyer. Okay. Now, this is an exchange between 2 police officers, one of whom is Constable Rolfe, to give you context, and it occurs around the 3rd of September 2019. The other officer texts him and says, "Sorry about the stress caused by losing my shit the other night. Stress you didn't need. You sorted it well. I've just had enough." He was the second person to press my button that night. In response, Constable Rolfe wrote back, "Bro, there was literally no stress about it. I'm all for that shit. I've done the same thing to you more than once before." And this is the part I wanted you to listen carefully to. "I'm always ready to make my camera face the other way and be a dramatic cunt for the film, ha." Now, and the response from the other officer was, "And the Oscar goes to." What do you make of what Constable Rolfe is saying that he has done or is always ready to do?
Oh, I'm aware of that particular text message, and it's a reference to turning something's recording away from whatever it was supposed to be recording.
That is to attempt to either officially record something that was made up or not record something that should have been captured in terms of the interaction. Is that fair?
That's not how I read it, as though turning away, something is recording and you're turning away from it.
And then being dramatic out of camera to give the impression on the recording that something other than that which was actually happening was happening.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean now. Yeah, potentially, yes.
To make something up about something they were doing as a police officer.
Potentially, yes.
Okay. The next one, because they're all in the same line, they're not about race, they're all about what might be prevalent in the service. Do you understand? The next one is at brief 3-161, page 6406. And I'll read it to you. The other officer, which happens to be the same officer as we were talking about before, says, quote, "Well, fuck me, I'm having to answer more questions about an incident over a year ago. Some turd claimed I knocked him off his push bike with 301. Now, 301's a reference to a baton, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And then roughed him up. Only person to get roughed up was me, as I got dragged on my face as he was trying to run away. All seems well, but they now have a hard-on over the fact I used 301 to try and block him in. They're now asking a fourth lot of questions. I think they pick someone up and then just pick on them. Finding my breaking point, maybe." Now, before I keep going, have you read this?
No.
No, okay. The response from Constable Rolfe was, "Over a year ago, question mark, fuck, they're gay cunts." This is the important part. Unfortunately, the important part. "Yeah, they just find a name and go for, A over and over. Fuck them. Just let them waste time, and then if they ever have enough evidence, just stress leave until they let it go. Seems what everyone else does." Now, can I summarise what I understand that to be, is that to tell him not to get too distressed about any investigation and give him a tactic to avoid being held to account.
This is really about distribution. Mr. Bowe's going to interpret these messages. I don't see he's talking in that. I mean, it's okay, obviously, that's council assistants done to put these messages to the students and ask him what he makes of it, or whether he has any views on the appropriateness of those messages. But to really stand up and draw inferences from the bar table as to the meaning of those messages and then juxtapose that into a line of question, it's really not going to achieve anything.
I'm not sure that the officer's opinion as to what is contained in the messages is necessarily helpful unless it's terminology that's rife and known within the police force. However, the second aspect, if you're putting a proposition to him,
Not yet.
that
People are jumping in the gun, Your Honour. I'm not going to be doing what is being complained of. If you let me, I'll just finish it, and there won't be. I'm not putting my take on this communication.
you can put your take and ask if that phenomenon of people going on stress leave and delaying matters so that they go away is something that this officer is aware of.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Then, yeah, I'm happy for you
Thank
to
you,
put
Anna.
that question rather than asking for an opinion about what is contained in the text message.
Thank you, I won't do that. The line in that text that I wanted to ask you about, he says, seems what everyone else does, right? Does that concern you that he at least had the belief that this is a thing that a lot of people do in the police force when they're faced with a examination of their conduct?
So the first thing I'd like to say, Your Honour, is a reference was made in the lead up to that question about it indicating it was widespread in the police force. I would suggest that is not the case. I'd suggest that is a very isolated type of communication. And in answer to the question, that's not widespread. So there are lots and lots of people in the police force who are being investigated for matters, and it has occurred and it does occur that people do take some personal leave, but it's not widespread in my view, and it may be very much isolated to an individual as opposed to something that's more broader in the agency.
I just want to be a little bit more nuanced with one final question on that text. I wasn't suggesting that that was evidence that it was widespread. I was asking you, is it concerning that he believed it was widespread?
Your language leading up to that question indicated that it was widespread. That was what you were alluding to. I just wanted to clarify that point. So your question?
When he says seems what everyone else does, suggests that the writer of that text held a belief that it was something that was widespread. Does that concern you?
Seems. He seems to think that. That doesn't mean it's widespread.
Okay. The last text exchange and my last questions, Your Honour, is at brief 3161 at page 7080. There's a communication with a person who appears to be a paramedic, not naming them, appears to be a paramedic. She has a communication with him to which he responds, "You didn't have power all night. Yuck, that's shit. Yeah, you guys start night so early. Who will you be working with tonight?" And this is the line. "I've had some busy shifts lately, mashed some dude's face against a wall, and that talkative name, paramedic, came and, quote, quickly got on board that we were treating him extra nice so he didn't make a complaint." Did you hear that, what I've just read?
I heard it.
The suggestion in there to this other paramedic is that another paramedic had got on board to diminish the seriousness of what he had done so that the person wouldn't complain. Did you get that from that?
That's what it appears to allude to, yes.
Does that concern you, that sort of collaboration is believed to have been given by, well, Rolf thinking that there was some degree of collaboration by the person to avoid a proper scrutiny of what he had done?
Without knowing the context and the left and right of that, yes.
Okay, thank you, Your Honour. I have no further questions.
Your Honour, just lest there be no confusion or any confusion, the 301 I'm told is a call sign of a car
Sorry,
rather than a weapon. A 301 is a call sign.
well, can I just say, with respect, I'd like to hear evidence on that because our inquiries...
I suspect that there will be
What
evidence.
I was going to suggest is that there's some evidence that 301 is a reference to the use of a baton, a police baton.
All right, it's something we'll
Yes,
try and
thank you.
clarify,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Bowe. Yes, Ms. Moreau.
Thank you, Your Honour. Assistant Commissioner, my name's Paula Moreau. I act for the Brown family, so another of the families of Kumanjayi Walker. I'm going to be focusing on the events on the evening to start with. So when I'm asking questions, it really is about the series of decisions that you made and were a party to from the time of the shooting onwards. Now, as I understand your evidence, your information about what the community was doing outside of the police station came from three sources. 2 phone calls with Senior Constable Hand that were very early on, 1 or more calls with Superintendent Nobbs, and a short call with Derek Williams. Is that right?
Yes.
And particularly focusing on the information you received from Senior Constable Hand and Superintendent Nobbs, that information was necessarily incomplete because the information was coming from inside the police station. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, so there wasn't a full vision on what was occurring outside.
I can't actually speak for the way in which they made their determinations.
Okay. Can I ask you if you recall the detail of the information you got about the possibility of arms being held by the community, what information that was?
That they were armed. It wasn't really any more detail than that.
So no basis of how that was observed
No,
or armed with any, or what that was,
not specifically, no.
or at what point in the night that was?
Well, that was spelt out in my evidence at what points in time I was
you were
provided that
told.
information.
Okay, so we just refer to the timing of the information where you've
Yes.
noted that down, but it really was that sparse, if we can describe it that way.
That what, sorry?
Sparse, just that they were armed.
Yes.
And what about the figure of 200? It doesn't appear in your notes until there's a meeting with other people present. Do you know how you came to the number of up to 200 people outside?
Not specifically. Would have been part of the information that was shared through one of the briefings that occurred as the night went on.
I see. That's okay. The Senior Constable Hand gave evidence that when he spoke with you, that you mentioned to him that you, at that point, believed there was going to be significant tensions in the community and you were concerned for their safety. That's an accurate recollection of the conversation with you, one of the two conversations with you, would you agree?
With Hand,
Yes,
Hand said to me that he'd never been so scared in his life.
yes.
They were his words.
I'm just asking you about your reflection back to him. Did you express to him your concerns for their safety?
Oh, I don't recall.
Okay, but you would accept that his memory would be a reliable one?
Senior Constable Hands?
Yes.
There's no reason to think otherwise.
And it's consistent with your statement, in fact. If the officer can be taken to page 7 of Exhibit 7-145. Oh, thank you. Officer, I understand that you may have the facility of an iPad that would make it easier for you to traverse to where I'm going to ask you questions about.
It's page 7.
Page 7 of the statement.
Do you need it on the screen?
No.
If you, I don't know if that's got the statement attached, like if you scroll all the way up on that document.
Okay.
You've got that page of your statement? Okay.
Not yet.
It's paragraph 35 of that statement. If you can just familiarise yourself with the contents of that page, you can see that you're describing there the time in between the two phone calls with Officer Hand, and at paragraph 35 you indicate your concerns about the well-being of staff within the police station arising at around that time.
Yes.
Yes. Now, you then have a short conversation you put in your handwritten notes with Derek Williams. Do you recall how long that conversation was?
It was very short. So
Yes, and the point you told us earlier was to see how he was going, but also to gauge what was occurring outside of the station, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And you asked him, did you, whether you should be worried about any harm to police?
Yes.
And did he then agree with you that that was a possibility?
As my notes say, he indicated that he was concerned that police might get hurt.
Yes, but do you recall whether he was agreeing with your question that it was a possibility, or whether that was something that he offered himself?
No, he offered that information.
Did he also tell you that the elders would work together to sort it out in that conversation?
I don't recall that.
I see. Did you at that time know that he was an uncle to Kumanjayi?
No, I didn't.
I see. Now, you've mentioned your past experiences and why you formed the belief that I've just taken you to. And as I understand it, that comes from your time as an officer in Yundamu and Papunya, and also whilst you were the OIC in the Southern Division. Those experiences that you described with under questions from Dr. Dwyer.
Yes.
And those experiences, as I understand it, were not did not involve violence against police.
Not always.
No, well, not at all. The riots and the community unrest that you were describing was intra-community violence, wasn't it?
That was the evidence in relation to that aspect, but it was also violence toward police.
Do you mean that was incidental to the police interventions in relation to that violence?
No, at other occasions where we were subjected to violence by the community.
I see. But your evidence, I think, right towards the end of your evidence in answer to questions from Dr. Dwyer was that you had not experienced a situation like this before. That's correct, isn't it?
No, I've never had to deal with an operational response to a police shooting in a remote community.
That's right. Did you have any protocols or research that was available to you as a police officer that would assist you to negotiate the response with the community to such an event?
Certainly not available to me at that point in time.
No. Are you aware of any since?
Look, I'm aware that we've had police shootings on remote communities in the Northern Territory in the past.
Yes.
But there isn't a document as such that, if that's the type of information you're
Yes.
referring to.
Yes.
So no.
Any guidance for someone in your position making decisions about response to the community in relation to such an event as this?
I wasn't a part of the two scenarios that I'm thinking of that have impacted on the Northern Territory Police over time, but I am sure both of those went through coronial inquests, and any recommendations from those inquests would have been incorporated into the policy that exists currently for the Northern Territory Police, as it relates to those two remote community police shootings that I'm aware of.
Did you have regard to them at the time of these events on the 9th of November 2019?
Not specifically, as I'm saying, if there was recommendations that came from those particular inquests that were relevant to our policy would have been, they would have been considered with any review that was conducted of those policies.
Were there any things in particular from those inquests that you recall were of use in this one?
I don't recall the actual content of those two particular matters.
Okay, thank you. On the basis of the information that you were provided in relation to the community's activities outside of the police station that we've gone through, and of course your past experiences that we've also just spoken to, you developed the concern that there was the risk of violence either towards the police station or towards police members, correct?
Correct.
And this concern of yours really underlay the decision-making I think you've described about the response to the community throughout. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
And that in particular is most acute in relation to the decision not to tell anyone that Kumanjayi had passed.
Yes.
Now, you accepted, of course, that your fears about that did not eventuate here.
Yeah, I did give that evidence, but also the callous reality of the decision-making may have been a contributing factor to the fact that that didn't occur.
I see that's a bit speculative, though. We don't know.
As is your question.
Well, my question was really your acceptance that in fact your fears were not made out. They didn't eventuate, did they?
No, I gave that evidence, but again, as I say, that we're talking about foresight or hindsight. The decisions were made, and those decisions were executed, albeit at points in time not particularly well, and no harm was caused further to the community from a physical harm point of view or a property point of view, and that in that context has been maintained. So I have to take some ownership of that decision and some of that as an outcome, acknowledging the callous reality around the decisions that were made at that time and the impact they had on the community from a cultural sorry sense, and the impact that's had on them then, and that obviously continues to have on them now.
Well, significant psychological harm, correct?
Well aware.
Sorry?
I'm well aware.
Yes. So that was the impact. Now, have you been made aware subsequently of some videos that were published by a member of the community live via Facebook streaming outside of the police station on the night?
I'm aware there's video that exists. I've never seen it.
You haven't seen it?
I haven't.
All right. Now, as I understand your evidence earlier, you indicated that you did not actually consider at the time, because of other operational priorities, you did not actually consider inviting family either by phone or in person into the police station before Kumanjayi Walker passed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at the time on the 9th, you had personal relationships with some elders in the Yundamu community, correct?
I did have, and still do.
Yes, Mr. Sims in particular, but also Eddie Robertson, correct?
So I know both of those gentlemen from my time at Yundamu, but they're not two of the people that I have closer relationships with.
I see. Who were the ones that you knew at the time on the 9th of November?
Well, I knew them all, but I had different relationships with lots of... So
Kumanjayi Nelson is someone that
yes.
you were aware of? Any other names other than Mr. Sims and Kumanjayi Nelson?
Do you want me to name all the people that I knew?
No, the closest elders that you would contact in an event such as this.
Well, again, I hadn't been exposed to an event such as this, but the people that I would communicate with if I was ever in community, I had seen Eddie Robinson, as you've indicated, Warren Williams, Robin Granitz, who I see outside, Kumanjayi Nelson, Francis Kelly, Langdon, I can't think of his first name now. Jimmy Langdon.
Thank you.
I heard his name.
Yes.
And look, there are others. And Otto Sims is another gentleman that I did know. But and as it turns out, some of the Walker family members that I spoke of earlier in my evidence, I've actually had a bit to do with Wilson Walker as one of those people who was close to Kumanjayi Nelson as well.
Thank you.
And Ned Hargraves.
Now, you were taken by Dr. Dwyer to a note that reflected the names of Mr. Sims and another man, as well as identification of the grandfather of Kumanjayi Walker. You remember that that moment?
Yes.
Was that the first time you gave consideration to contacting any elders in the community yourself?
Look, I don't recall.
Okay. You'd agree, wouldn't you, that...
Actually, sorry, no, because I'd already contacted Derek Williams, who I consider to be a leader or an elder within the community.
I see. Did you consider, though, contacting someone, some other elders in the community at any point prior to sort of considering notification of the death?
I don't recall what my thought processes were at the time in that regard.
It is a measure that you would have available to you when confronted with a community concern to make that proactive contact to those elders that you knew?
Potentially, if it was appropriate based on the circumstances.
Yes. Well, what made it inappropriate in this case?
Because of the way in which this was occurring moment by moment. I'll be honest, we were dealing very much with the operational. The decision had been made that Eddie Robinson was going to be the point of contact. I didn't know what the relationship with any of these other people may have been, other than knowing through the information that had been provided that Eddie was a point in contact. The appropriateness of talking to anyone else, I don't know where that would have necessarily taken me at that point in time. And unfortunately, I can't recall the exact time that Kumanjayi passed. So
It was around 8:39 p.m. and I think you were told at about 8:49 p.m. after you spoke with Derek Williams.
So there was an hour of activity, and in that hour, a lot was happening operationally, and I did not have the capacity to turn my mind to the opportunity to ring an elder at that point in time. I didn't turn my mind to it at that point.
I see. You gave some evidence that you're concerned that some elders might react emotionally to the news. You were talking about the news of the passing, is that right?
Correct.
You're not suggesting they would necessarily be violent, of course.
I didn't know. That was my concern, because I have seen people who are in that elder group that I just spoke of who have behaved in a manner that wasn't in keeping with their status or standing in the community. I'm not going to say their names in court, but that is the evidence, the information that I had from my personal experience that I utilised to make that very, very difficult decision at that point in time.
All right. I want to turn to the records of the decision not to advise the family of the death. And Your Honour, I note I'm coming close to 20 minutes. I expect that I will be another 15 minutes, if I may. These are really important issues for my clients, and I doubt that I'll be in this position very long.
We'll keep going with the questions.
Thank you.
We've got a number of other people who need to ask questions, and we have limited time.
I appreciate that, and I'll be as quick as I can. Assistant Commissioner, in your statement, which I think you have before you, at paragraph 49, we're talking about this time just after Kumanjayi has passed. You can see in the lead up to that paragraph there.
Yes.
And if you can then also flick over to page 30 of that exhibit on the iPad in front of you, this comes to your handwritten notes, which is an attachment to that. And there's a handwritten note entry at 8:54 p.m. or 20:54 p.m. Have you been able to turn that handwritten note up yet?
Sorry?
Have you got the handwritten note, 20:54 p.m?
Yes, I do.
Critical decisions made, recorded by Beer, and then you've noted that you've been told that Kumanjayi has passed. Yes?
Yes.
Now, I'm just trying to inquire whether that critical decision at 8:54 p.m. is the same that I took you to in paragraph 49, which is then the decision that the family would not be advised of the passing of Kumanjayi.
I would suggest so, yes.
Thank you. And then if you can move on further to page 46 of the document in front of you, and this is the handwritten notes, I understand it, of Assistant Commissioner Beer, that be right? TW005 in that exhibit. You've got that on the screen. It starts off at the top of the page, 2200 hours.
Yes.
And are these the notes of Assistant Commissioner Beer?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
And this relates to, as I understand it, the IMT meeting that was held, which is obviously the command meeting at 10 p.m. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Can I just take your attention to about the bottom third of that handwritten page? You'll see there's notes that really the relevant passage starts Derek, and then you can see T elders. You see that passage there?
Yes.
And then underneath it's got up to 200 people, comma, currently 20. Now, you'll note that Superintendent Nobbs was attending by phone in this meeting from other records. Was this information that was being provided by him?
I don't recall.
Okay, you don't recall hearing information of up to 200 people, comma, currently 20.
I was clearly part of the meeting, but I don't
Do you recall
specifically
hearing that the numbers might have reduced at the station at around this time?
Not necessarily.
I see. You see further on, no overt acts of violence, -rocks, community calm.
Yes.
Again, do you recall those matters being described to the group from Superintendent Nobbs in this meeting?
Look, not necessarily, but that's not to suggest it wasn't part of the meeting.
Can I ask you to turn 2 more pages, electronic pages, to what are the typewritten notes of that meeting, as I understand it? Can you see that there?
Yes.
And you told us in your statement and in your interview that you understood that to be consistent with the handwritten notes, but can I take you to something that I suggest is inconsistent with that, what I've just taken you to? You see down in the dot points, critical decisions, number 4. Due to up to 200 community members armed congregating outside of the police station, the decision has been made to not confirm the deceased. See that there?
Yes.
Now that's inconsistent with the handwritten notes that I just took you to, isn't it?
It appears to be, yes.
Yes. Nevertheless, at 10 p.m, it's recorded that the decision was made not to tell the community about the passing of Kumanjayi Walker.
It was recorded then, but the decision was made earlier than that.
Yes, at around the 7:54 p.m. mark. Is that right? I'm sorry, 8:54 p.m.
Correct.
mark. And there you see in that paragraph 4, you will wait till TRG is once on the ground before progressing that. Is that before we're making the decision to notify media, it says there, but I think you've indicated that the decision was not to notify the community until the TRG had arrived on the ground. Is that right?
Yes, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but that's correct. That's my recollection.
I see. Now,
Just on that point, if you go back to your notes, 2206, halfway down, 20 out front station, up to 200.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honour. That makes it complete. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I wanted to take you now back to your statement again, which is at page 14 of that electronic document that you've got in front of you, paragraph 68 to 70. Have you got that there, sir?
Yes.
Now, you'll see that at paragraph 70, at least by midnight, you have recorded that it was understood that most people had moved away from the station and moved back into the community, correct?
Yes.
And I think we can see from Officer McCormick's notes that it was reflected that things appear calm outside of the police station. Do you recall that sort of conversation occurring at this midnight briefing?
Who's Officer McCormack?
He's a scribe for Superintendent Nobbs. I don't suggest that he was present with you. It's Exhibit 5-03 for my friends, but the essence of paragraph 70, as you're expressing it, is that by midnight at least things were calm outside the station. There was no one there.
At that point in time, yes.
Yes. Now, I want to ask you, was there any reconsideration of the decision not to notify the family or the elders of Kumanjayi's passing once things were calm at midnight.
Although things were calm at midnight, it doesn't mean things couldn't have changed very quickly. So the direct answer to your question is no.
You would wait for TRG to arrive.
Correct.
Now, you already had Forward Commander Zhang with an extra 3 officers who had already arrived. Did you not consider that was sufficient deterrence in the community to advise the family at that point?
No, they weren't in the community, they were in the police station.
Yes, but they were within. They had arrived at Yundamu.
They were in Yundamu, yes.
Yes, but you didn't consider that provided sufficient force in order for you to be to consider notifying either the elders that you know or particularly the family.
I don't accept the term force. They were simply replacing those officers who were at the station who were fatigued, replicating like for like, so to speak. And the idea of TRG coming into the community was to make sure that not just the members but the police assets were protected. If there was information provided into the community and there was an adverse reaction to that information, then the police weren't prepared for what that eventuation may have been, even though the presence of people outside the police station had changed.
Were you aware of the decision or the act of Forward Commander Zhang misleading Eddie Robertson about Kumanjayi State just after midnight?
Look, no, I wasn't until I went through some of the evidence yesterday.
I see. No one told you of that on the night?
No.
It should not have occurred, should it?
Look, no, I'm the way in which that transpired, there may have been reasons for the decision and at that point in time, but it certainly wasn't part of the plan that was formulated.
Well, misleading is additional to not telling, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, finally, very briefly, you then spent many days in the community from the Sunday late morning, I think.
Yes, I did.
And you were really consulting the elders that you've mentioned that you had relationships with.
I spent a lot of time with them, yes.
Yes. Establishing cultural protocols of healing.
Endeavouring to start that process, yes.
Yes, and attempting to rebuild trust between the police and the community.
As a starting point, and that was what led me to assisting the community in arranging for the ceremony to occur at the police station that happened on the Wednesday.
Because you had perceived that there was a significant level of distrust by members of the community in the police force.
Well, at that point in time, the community had just been through a scenario where a police officer was responsible for the shooting death of one of their community members. So they were still grappling with the gravity of that situation. So to suggest anything other, as you've just described, it's probably hard for me to say, but there was clearly a lot of sadness and hurt in the community. And my role there was to start that process. It's a process that had to be started at a point in time, and I was the person that commenced that on behalf of our agency, and that work needs to be ongoing.
But in your meetings with these elders, and you had several of them, and you helpfully set some of the feedback you'd received into an email that you then passed on to other members of the Northern Territory Police Force. But in those meetings, the expressions to you were not just grief and despair at the loss of their loved one, was it? Wasn't just grief and despair that were being expressed to you.
No, there was anger and sadness.
Yes. There are questions being asked about matters that the community perceived that they had been either deceived or kept in the dark on.
Yes.
Yes. In particular, why the ambulance moved if it wasn't carrying Kumanjayi to medical help, for instance. Yes. And why the decision was made when there was no medical clinic operational in the community. These were the questions you were being asked.
Yes, they were.
And they were pertinent, obviously, questions.
To the community, yes.
Yes, but revealed that and there was concern about the lack of information that had come back to the community about Kumanjayi's state.
Yes, I suppose so, yes.
Now, In recording all these questions and taking these questions from the elders, did you attempt to give them any answers at that point, or were you reinforcing that this would be the subject of future investigations, including like these in front of Her Honour?
It was probably the latter. I mean, I certainly couldn't answer most of the questions myself, and did not endeavour to do any of that, because by that point in time there was an investigative process underway that was coronial, that then became criminal as well. So I had to be particularly careful in that regard.
Now, you mentioned you were invited to attend at the men's meeting in Surrey camp. You mentioned in your statement that the men that you were meeting with, alongside Constable Lanyon Smith, endorsed developing a set of cultural protocols between police involvement and engagement with Walpurgis people. You recall that occurring?
Yes.
Are you aware whether that process ever eventuated?
So rereading my statement over this weekend, I'm not entirely sure. And it was a question that I posed to myself, whether that actually occurred. I know that Constable Smith did do some work on that particular concept. Mm-hmm. I know that I spoke with all of the police officers that were at Yuendamu, many of whom had come from many and varied places across the territory that hadn't been operating on Walpurgis country previously. So I had a conversation with them about the appropriate protocols, what they needed to do whilst they were there. But all of that was to do with the sensitivities around the police relationship at that point in time and what that enduring impact would be.
Can I take you to one handwritten note of a meeting that you had on the 12th of November? It's Exhibit TW006. It's page 53 of that electronic document that you have. It starts community meeting 14:20 hours 12/11/2019. That's at the top of that page. Can you see that passage?
Not necessarily.
It should be 57 of the electronic record that you have. Not 53. I think I'd given you the wrong number.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
So take me to that again,
Yes,
please.
so you can see community meeting 14:20 hours, and as I understand from your statement, this preceded a broader community meeting. And you can see there's a list of attendees, including Kumanjayi Nelson, Derek Williams, James Butcher, Ned Hardgraves, Eddie Robertson. Can you see that list of names there?
Oh, yes.
Yes. I just want to take you down to where it has Eddie on the left-hand side, and then there's a list of dash points. The first is minimum police. Second is pistols only. Third is normal uniform, and fourth is listen to, and I don't know what the last word is. I was going to ask you what that is.
That's a good question.
You don't know?
Oh, look, I'm not entirely sure.
Do you recall what Mr. Robertson was telling you and requesting with those dot points?
So that was a meeting that the community were having with the Commissioner of Police, and they were just sharing their sentiments.
Yes.
At that time.
The question of minimum police, was that a request to reduce police numbers in the community?
I'm not entirely sure.
You can't recall. Pistols only, was that a reference to not having long arms in the community?
Again, that was just each person who was there who wanted to have an opportunity to speak was given the opportunity to speak, and I just made some very brief
So you made brief notes and you don't now recall what those community elders were saying?
Look, not necessarily, other than what was in my notes.
All right. You also met with the elders on some months later in March, and I can take you to it, but I have only one quick question about it. In March, you met with Valerie Martin, Francis Kelly, Tommy Watson, and 2 other Walpurgis men, and they asked that the police develop an induction package for new staff members. Again, I'm just going to ask you, do you know whether that occurred?
So I'm aware that it did occur, and as I've already provided evidence today, I've reviewed that, and in my view, it requires some further information in relation to particularly that scenario, the scenario that we're speaking about from November 2019, and some additional information about the surrounding communities that aren't included in that current document. But there is a draft induction document.
Will you take that on board to continue that process?
I've already had a conversation with some my colleagues, and yes, we will make sure that's completed certainly before this is finished.
All right.
So we can contribute.
Could the draft of that document be circulated to the coroner and to the parties in this matter?
I anticipate that Deputy Commissioner Smallpage APM will be providing additional information as a part of his ongoing dispositions that he'll provide the coroner, and it will be included in that.
And will you personally be involved in the development of that protocol
I've already been involved and provided my
in the
feedback.
future
I
to
can
ensure
do.
it gets to completion, I
I
suppose?
can do, and there'll be others who have more contemporary knowledge than I that will also be involved.
My final question, you indicated that when faced with racist statements made by police officers, that it's a supervisor's or a senior officer's responsibility to manage that individually, and the response will be tailored to the seriousness and the circumstances. You remember that part of your answer to Dr. Dwyer earlier?
Yes.
Can I ask you, is there any framework or policy that you're aware of within Northern Territory Police that would assist you to determine the appropriate response in those circumstances?
There are a number. You've got the Respect, Equity and Diversity policy, and then there's obviously our disciplinary policies that underpin the Police Administration Act.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Thank you, Your Honour, for the indulgence.
Mr. Moore.
Commissioner, I'm counsel for Naja. When you spoke with Mr. With your colleague, sorry, I'll start again, at 1:51 p.m. on Saturday, when you received a telephone call, is there a record anywhere of exactly what you were told about what was being required by way of deployment?
Not made by me until I made reference in my notes, as you've seen, and then the development of my statement sometime thereafter.
So I want to suggest to you that Mr. Nobbs has suggested in his evidence that in that conversation he recommended to you that IRT members be deployed. Do you agree with that?
So I've already given the evidence to suggest that he recommended that members of the IRT would be the people that he would choose, simply because of their readiness to be deployed, but not the IRT specifically.
He was also suggesting that he recommended to you that the IRT members who were to be deployed take non-lethal munitions such as beanbag rounds and AR-15s to unit. Was that said to you or not?
Well, AR-15 is a lethal munition, so that doesn't accord, but I don't recall that being asked of me at all.
So do you discount entirely any suggestion by Mr. Nobbs that he discussed with you that IRT members would take anything more than normal accoutrement?
I don't recall it being discussed at all.
So you have now twice used language to suggest you're not certain about what you were told.
So I don't
What can you
recall.
say about what Nobbs told you about weapons?
I don't recall that conversation taking place, other than to talk about the uniform that was to be worn. And extension of the uniform is the basic accoutrements that any police officer would wear.
You never read the standard operating procedures for the IRT when you had that conversation.
No, I had not at that
But
time.
you knew that only someone in the position of a commander and higher, like you, could approve the deployment of the IRT. You knew that much.
I was aware of that,
How
yes.
did you know that?
I can't say how I knew that. It was obviously had been shared with me at some point.
But you understood that you were being asked to approve the deployment of people who happened to be IRT. Is that right?
General duties officers.
Yeah. And
Yes.
did you not think that it was important to make a permanent record of what you had decided and what you had directed?
In hindsight, yes, but the decision wasn't one that was an out of the ordinary decision. It was a conversation about deploying general duties officers. In my view, it wasn't one that was relevant to the IRT or the IRT policy.
You had been instrumental in developing the contain and control, what do you call it? Contain and cordon and contain group that turned into the IRT. Is that right?
I was involved in its reinvigoration. Yes.
And you were aware of the officer who was primarily responsible in Alice Springs for that group, as it came to be known as the IRT, right?
The commander.
I'm talking about Sergeant Bowles. Are you aware of him?
I'm aware of him. Yes.
You gave him particular responsibility to develop the protocol. Is that right? The training mechanisms.
For memory, yes, I think it was Sergeant Bowens. There could have been others involved. I know that Sergeant Mike Williams was particularly instrumental as well in the development of the training and then the policy that went with that training.
So, did you maintain lines of communication with Mr. Bowens over the years since the IRT was established?
Not really, no.
So, going to the conversation on that afternoon with Mr. Nobbs about 1:51 p.m, you understood that part of his concern was the evacuation or potential evacuation of health staff.
Yes.
You have never experienced such an evacuation, is that right?
Well, as I said in my evidence, that I've been exposed to it previously, but we managed to allay the concerns of the health staff at that point in time, and the evacuation didn't occur.
Do I understand from your evidence that in the past, when there was a threat by health staff to walk out of a community, it had been discussed and their concerns met before they left?
The health concerns?
Yes.
In the scenario that I have in mind, yes.
Have you ever had the experience of, as it were, a walkout by health staff that had not been the subject of discuss this and let's try and work this out between the police and the health staff?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Has that been your experience of the way that problem was dealt with in the past?
Yes,
Let's talk it out.
communicate.
Yeah. So on this particular afternoon, when you said whatever it was that you said to Mr. Nobbs about his concerns about what was happening in Unity and the health staff in particular, did you pick up the phone to talk to anybody at health?
I did not, but
Did you direct anybody to do that?
I have a recollection that Superintendent Nobbs had done so, or someone had done so already, but I certainly did not.
Well, Mr. Nobbs was in where? Alice Springs.
I assume so.
So did you understand that there'd been on the ground discussion in the community in Unity between the police on the one hand and the health staff on the other?
I now know that there were conversations between police on the ground and the police, the health clinic, and I understand there was also conversations at a middle management level as well, but I wasn't privy to all of that information then.
Mr. Wurst, whatever it was that you said to Mr. Nobbs about police, extra police, some of whom were going to be from the IRT, was that the only strategy that you had about how to deal with the issue at hand at that time?
What was the issue?
The problem with police resourcing, with the need to provide respite to the police who are on the ground, the particular acute issues that were arising as a result of the walkout or threatened walkout by health staff and the property offences that had been committed that were apparently directed at the health staff property. Those are the things I referred to.
So community safety underpins every community, and part of that decision was to provide additional policing resources to provide that respite, but also to provide that broader community reassurance and community safety aspect. So at that point in time, yes.
So how did the deployment of the police dog and its handler factor into those considerations?
So that particular asset can conduct roving patrols, no different to any other police officer, and provide additional footprint and presence in the community, and that's what I understand that particular asset was going to do through that deployment.
So, Mr. Wurst, when later that night you're at the war and you've got the terrible communications that you learned what had happened, from that point on, right through the night, right through the early hours of the next morning, it would seem that you made a deliberate decision, a difficult one, that there needed to be tight control over information concerning Kumanjayi's death.
Unfortunately, yes.
And as you've described it, the callous reality of your decision making was that there was not one single person, not one single Walpry person that you could trust with that information until much later in the evening. Is that a fair way to summarise your decision-making process?
Yes, without adding all the context to it, but yes.
I understand the context, but the bottom line is that there is, however many people were living in Yuendamu, there wasn't a single person there that you could trust with the information. Is that right?
And it wasn't so much the trust with the information of the individual, it was the information that was shared beyond that individual and the impact that would have. So it wasn't about the individuals necessarily, but it was about the way in which that information and the impact it would have on the community.
So one person risked the whole group becoming an uncontrollable risk. Is that your evidence?
My evidence is that I did not know how to ameliorate that risk if the community reacted in a negative and a hostile way toward police, and I couldn't bring myself to a position where I could do that in any safe way until certain things had been done, as I provided my evidence.
And as I understand your evidence, you stand by everything you said and did.
I stand by it, but acknowledge that that hurt and the harm that decision has caused the community.
You still think, irrespective of the hurt and the harm, including psychological harm, and the lack of trust that's developed between the community, Walpry, and your colleagues, you called it right.
Yes.
And have you had significant support from your police colleagues in the way in which you made these decisions since it happened?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Has anyone criticised you?
Of course.
So has anyone caused you to answer in some official capacity for the decisions that you made in that period between 7:30 in the evening and, say, 3 o'clock in the morning?
I'm doing that now.
So this is the process, is it?
It's the most appropriate process, yes.
Okay. So what about in the police service? Has anyone said, we want you to explain yourself? Why did you do this?
Well, the appropriate way of dealing with this is to do go through this process first. If the police senior executive wish to go through that process with me, that's a matter for them.
Has anyone supported you and said you called it right?
I've had conversations with people who've suggested that it was a tough decision, but ultimately, in their mind, they may have thought it was a correct decision.
I mean, if you have to give us a rough estimate.
Where is this going?
Okay, I'll withdraw the question. I won't waste time trying to justify it. You're right. So you've been asked to comment on a number of text messages from one phone, from one police officer. Not only did those text messages relate racist sentiment, sexist sentiment, anti-gay sentiment, but they also made comments about use of force and the differences in policing between the IRT members, perhaps, on the one hand, and bush police on the other. And you know what I'm referring to in the message that were drawn to your attention.
Yes.
So, do you understand that there is an approach or an attitude in the Northern Territory Police, that there is a different way to police in Aboriginal communities compared to Alice Springs, Darwin, Palmerston?
So if you're working in a remote community, yes, policing is different because you're in a remote community. The environment is different, the context is different. So it is policing differently, yes.
So, would you accept that many of the skills that inform policing in communities should also underpin policing in urban centres?
The training and skill required doesn't change regardless of where you are, it's the way in which it's applied.
Are you aware that there's a looking down the nose at police who work in Aboriginal communities by other officers in urban centres?
Only by the text message that I was just made aware of.
And you're not aware of any other police officer at any time saying or acting as though they support a difference?
So remote policing is the heart of what it is to be a Northern Territory police officer. It's esteemed. I actually only know the opposite, that people who've done lots of remote policing are held in very high regard, not the way in which that text message portrayed remote police.
So the Northern Territory has special challenges for police, doesn't it? Because of geography and because of the difficulties that are posed to police on the ground with Aboriginal people, correct?
I wouldn't call them special, I would call them unique.
So,
And that's the territory context and environment within which we operate.
so what do you think should be done to ensure that there is no system in place that allows for racist attitudes to dictate police techniques?
So I'll provide a piece of evidence that is my own personal experience. So I have taken it upon myself to approach the recruit coordinators within the police college, and I spend an hour or two with every recruit course to speak to them about my experiences in the Northern Territory as a police officer in remote communities, the joys and benefits you get from that, and the ability for you to become the best police officer you can be through that particular experience and exposure, and then all the way up to where I sit today.
What else?
What else?
What else can be?
Oh, it's meet and vary. It's everybody has a role and function to play in relation to the culture of this agency. And our agency, from this particular experience, I would suggest that racism, to call it that, is not widespread. It's very sporadic and in very small pockets, and it is not endemic across the agency. It is not widespread whatsoever. We, however, need to be aware of it, mindful of it, call it out when we see it, deal with it, make sure that the strong culture that we have and we continue to develop and grow is maintained, so that we are there to support the Territory community, no matter where you work, in the remotest of communities or in the middle of an urban setting.
How many times have you seen someone brought to book for racism?
I couldn't tell you.
Well, tell us your best estimate.
I've got no idea.
Well, have
I
you
don't
seen
work.
any?
Yes, it's happened, but I don't work in the professional standards command, so I'm not someone who's
How many
exposed
have you
to it.
heard about, roughly?
Oh, I've got no idea. There's been a few. I couldn't tell you a number. I don't
Your
know.
Honour, I object to these questions. You're going to receive evidence from the person who is in a position to give you an informed evidence about it. He's the right person to ask these questions of.
So from this officer, he's aware of a few.
If you,
I don't know whether you want to
That's
ask
all right.
anything further about how he became aware of them or
No.
how that's communicated throughout the police.
yes, thank you. How do you find out about this?
I can ask.
How many?
No, when we're talking about a culture though, if there are some police who have been dealt with in relation to racism, is that something that is then communicated, not the individuals involved, but the fact that there has been an issue, is that communicated to the police force more broadly to reinforce how inappropriate and how unacceptable those views are?
And if it was apparent, yes. I'm not aware, other than the text messages, of any recent example of racism. I'm aware of a particularly specific scenario of racism. Some of the complaints against police may have race as an element, i.e. the aggrieved may be an Indigenous person, but that doesn't automatically mean that a matter was racist at its heart. That's probably where the challenge, Your Honour, comes into this particular space.
Could you give us a rough estimate how many Aboriginal people are police officers in the Northern Territory?
I understand that we have 11.2% of our workforce is Indigenous.
The police officers.
That's our entire workforce. I couldn't tell you the exact number of police officers.
So
We, however,
11%, approximately what proportion are serving sworn police officers?
that may be about 160 or 70.
That's the number.
I'm not entirely sure. I could find out the exact answer for you.
Find out that
But what I do know is the Northern Territory Police has the highest ratio of Indigenous employees of any police force in Australia. And we're proud of that, and we continue to work every day to increase that number through programs such as the Aboriginal Liaison Officer program, through the Community Resilience and Engagement Command, which Karen Elliott is in charge of, and that is about placing Indigenous people from Indigenous communities back in their community working for police to help bridge the gap between police and community and culture that sits in between. And some of those people have transitioned to become Aboriginal community police officers. And we have a lot of Aboriginal community police officers over time that transition to be constables.
the pay scales for ACPO's equivalent of serving police officers.
And no, it's commensurate to the instrument that they hold.
What's that mean?
Well, they don't have the same level of authority as a police officer. However, Aboriginal community police officers are also entitled to housing, as are all police officers. So they're considered on parity in that regard.
Should pay and conditions for Aboriginal community police officers be the subject of consideration in the police force? Shouldn't you put the pay scale to attract people to these jobs?
I don't think we have trouble attracting people to be Aboriginal community police officers.
You don't have any trouble.
I don't believe so. I believe we've got Aboriginal community...
Enough? Have you got enough?
So the challenge for our agency is we have funding that allows us to have so many particular positions, so many auxiliaries, constables, Aboriginal community police officers, so on and so forth. And we recruit to those positions, and then when attrition occurs, for whatever reason, we'll recruit to cover off in those positions. The exact number of vacancies in the Aboriginal Community Police Force, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't have an understanding of us having significant gaps in that space. I know we've got 37 Aboriginal liaison officers as well, so our workforce from an Indigenous employment sense has never been higher.
But you think it's adequate?
It can always be higher. I don't say it's adequate, but it's something that we work very hard at continuing to grow and build so that our agency is as representative of the community as it can be.
I think we've run out of time. Sorry, Mr. Ross.
We might take the afternoon adjournment, Mr. Chair.
All stand, Coronial Court after temporary adjourned.
Right. I think introduce No. Excellent. I had this panic at lunchtime.